What was happening with the Ciders children before they vanished from the classroom? We're going back 1 year before the children stopped going to school, because what we found may explain how they fell through the cracks. I'm Anjanette Levy, and this is Crime Fix.
They pulled 16 children out of that house on Omar Street. 16. And the school district tried to warn everyone a full year before it happened. I need you to sit with that for a second, because we all know how this story usually goes. Kids vanish from the system, nobody says a word, and by the time cameras show up, it's too late. But this time there's a paper trail, a real one, filed months before anyone in Gallia County, Ohio ever heard the name Ciders on the news. In October of 2021, the Gallia County School District filed truancy complaints against Gary Ciders Jr. and Elizabeth Ciders. 6 children. Not one day of school that entire year.
The 6 oldest Ciders children were once enrolled in school in Gallia County. We verified that because long before Gary and Elizabeth Ciders were charged with child endangering, the Gallia County School District filed truancy complaints against Gary Ciders Jr. and Elizabeth in October 2021, stating that their 6 oldest children had not been to school at all that school year. The school district considered them habitually truant, and the children were in danger of being labeled unruly children, meaning they were disobedient or didn't show up for school. At that time, the 6 oldest children were enrolled at Attaville Elementary School, but they didn't attend one day of school. Not one. But a year earlier, the children were enrolled in online school. At that time, the oldest Ciders child was 12, the second oldest was 11, the third was 9, the fourth was 8, the 5th was 7, and the 6th child was 6.
The district called them habitually truant. They warned the kids could be labeled unruly, meaning disobedient, meaning a kid who simply never showed up. And then, nothing happened. The complaint just sat there, buried in a file somewhere. You already know what I'm about to say, because you've seen this pattern before. The system saw it coming and did nothing. Here's the part that made my stomach turn when I first read it. A year before that truancy complaint, in August 2020, Elizabeth Ciders enrolled all 6 oldest children in Gallia County's online school, the Southern Ohio Digital Academy. At the time, the oldest was 12. The youngest of that group was only 6 years old. On paper, that looks like a mother trying to do right by her kids. And look, maybe that's exactly what it was at first. But nobody can tell you if those kids ever logged on. Not one class, not one test, not one grade. The district won't release that information. So for an entire school year, 6 children who should have been sitting in a classroom, getting fed, getting checked on by a teacher, by anyone, simply disappeared into a loophole with a login screen.
For that 2020-2021 school year, the 6 Ciders children were enrolled in Gallia County's online school. Yes, you heard me right. They were enrolled in online school. I've confirmed the children were enrolled in the district's Southern Ohio Digital Academy. Whether the children were actually taking part in classes online, taking tests, and getting grades, we don't know. You might be asking yourself, now who exactly enrolled the kids in online school? Any guesses? Well, if you guessed Elizabeth Ciders, you are right. Of course, Elizabeth enrolled the children in school. Moms typically take care of all of that stuff. Trust me, I am one. Elizabeth enrolled the children in online school on August 26, 2020. So it would appear that Elizabeth, the mother of the children, wanted her children to receive an education. But we don't know how active the children were in online school. The district isn't releasing that information, but in 2020, the world was locked down. A lot of districts were simply...
And here's the thing, though. A neighbor across the street from where the family lived back then said he'd see the kids playing outside sometimes.
Exploring today. Back in 2020, the children would have been living in this house on Honeysuckle in Cheshire. I've told you about the house before. A woman who works nearby told us the house was so trashed after the Ciders moved out that the owner had to renovate the place. She said there was human and pet feces and urine in the house and trash. It was a mess. A neighbor across the street had told us that the kids mostly stayed in the house, but he had seen them playing outside. And at that time, he thought there were 9 children. So how much schooling was actually taking place in the house?
He thought there were 9 of them at that point. 9 children. In a house people later described as filled with trash, with feces, with a smell that made the owner gut the place after they left. 9 kids, and an entire school district with no way of knowing if a single one of them ever opened a laptop. Now here's where it gets interesting, because this isn't really a story about one broken family. It's a story about a system that quietly changed the rules and let it happen. I want you to meet the person in this story who tried to sound the alarm and got buried by bureaucracy instead of headlines. His name is Philip Coon, Superintendent of Gallia County Local Schools. 6 years on the job. And when Annette Levy sat him down to talk about the Ciders case, he couldn't say much about the investigation itself. Legally, his hands were tied. But what he said about the system, that's the part they don't want you to focus on. Coon confirmed something that should stop every parent watching this cold. Back in October of 2023, Ohio quietly changed its homeschool law. Before that, parents had to submit a curriculum. A licensed teacher had to sign off at year's end. There was an assessment, some kind of state or district level test, so somebody, somewhere, could actually measure whether a child was learning anything at all. After the change, a parent fills out a form. That's it. No curriculum required. No teacher review. No assessment. No accountability past the moment you sign your name. Coon called it what it is. Wild West.
Let's break that down a little bit. You said there was a change that took place. Prior to that change taking place in Ohio, were the parents required, when they were saying, hey, I'm going to homeschool my child, were they required to follow a curriculum and provide a curriculum? Or how did that work prior to this change?
The change happened in October of 23. And so before that time, parents would submit the curriculum that they would be using to provide instruction for reading, math, social studies, science, etc. And then there would have to be a licensed teacher that would sign off on the completion of that at the end of the year, or an assessment where, taking, a state assessment or a district level assessment so that you could measure the progress. And that way you can ensure that education was happening. Now, parents can simply just, submit a form saying we're choosing.
His words, not mine. And here's the detail that should be its own headline, the one that I can't stop thinking about. Coon told Levy his district actually received a homeschool transcript from a family claiming their child had graduated from an academy that was just their own last name slapped onto a piece of paper. Think about that. A child can vanish from every safety net this country has and come out the other side with a diploma nobody can verify from a school that never existed anywhere except on that piece of paper.
That's astounding to me, because I thought, I guess I was wrong. I thought if you were going to homeschool your child, you'd have to have some correspondence with a school district and be like at least taking tests and doing all of this stuff. But you're saying there was a change that took place at the state level, and now it's just like, my child's going to attend the Anjanette Levy School of Homeschooling,
Right.
and I said we're good. He or she has graduated, and that's it.
That's correct. And it's a real concern, I think, for our society, because, I think we're not preparing. It's an educational neglect, really. We're not preparing a percentage of our students, to go out into the real world and be able to interact with other people, to be able to read at grade level, just to help them have the tools to be successful.
Now stay with me here, because this is the quiet part. The part one actually think about at night, if I'm honest with you. Somewhere in Gallia County, right now, there are other kids sitting in houses nobody's checking on. Not because anyone involved is necessarily evil, just because the paperwork says they're fine. And paperwork doesn't knock on doors. Coon laid out exactly what a school district actually does for a struggling family, beyond just teaching math. Meals for kids whose only real meal of the day is the one they get at school. Backpacks of food sent home quietly over long weekends. Christmas gifts for the kids whose families can't provide them. Dental care, in some cases, provided right through the district. Mandatory reporters. Teachers and staff trained, required by law, to spot the bruises, the hunger, the silence that tells you something's wrong at home. Once a child is homeschooled, the district loses every bit of that. Coon's exact phrase was that once a family chooses homeschooling, the district has no teeth.
Well, like I was saying earlier, I think that, school districts, especially in rural areas such as ours, provide so much more than just an education. It is kind of that well check and making sure that kids have what they need. It's Christmas gifts at Christmas time. It's backpacks of food that go home with kids over a long weekend. It's dental care, that is provided sometimes within districts and provided within ours. So that it's really a whole child approach, I think, when kids are in our buildings, and that we can really monitor their needs and help support families, really. Not, we're not here to go against parents or anything. We're here to support parents and provide where there are gaps in maybe their care. And that, I guess that would be another thing too, is just we have after school programs that we have within our buildings that help families, those working families, to have someone at home, to watch over their children when they're at work. So a lot of things I think that public education provide, that's really necessary to raising a child. It's that whole, it takes a village to raise a child. We're part of that.
They're outside our reach. 284 kids. That's how many were homeschooled in Gallia County last year, out of a district of roughly 2,100 students. Coon looked back 15 years and found the number used to sit around 34. 34 kids, 15 years ago, to 284 now. And he connected that spike directly to two things. COVID, when online learning became the norm for everyone, and that 2023 law change that erased the last shred of accountability.
284. We finished last year with 284 students being homeschooled out of approximately a little over 2,100 students. So we're somewhere between 12 to 13% of our students, potential students, that are being homeschooled at this time, which is a larger percentage, I think, than many other districts. But we've definitely seen that number, that percentage, really climb over the years. I've researched it back over the last 15 or so years, and that number, has drastically increased. I think the first year that I looked at it, we were about 34 students being homeschooled. And then I think that number really took off during COVID when that was, happening regularly. And so, again, I think the change in legislation really accelerated that, because now there's really no accountability. And so if another piece of this, I think, is chronic absenteeism. So we're responsible for reporting when students aren't, attending. And so when there's pressure to attend and there's potential, a legal situation, then parents can just choose to go ahead and homeschool. And then that takes care of the legal obligation to send your child to school.
So let's build the breadcrumb here, because this is where it stops being about one house and starts being about all of us. Chronic absenteeism in that district sat at 22% last year. 22% of kids missing at least a tenth of the school year. That's actually down from 26% the year before, which tells you something even scarier about how bad it's been. And Coon said it plainly. When the pressure to show up gets too heavy, when truancy court starts looking like a real threat, some families don't fix the attendance problem. They just check the homeschool box, and the legal obligation disappears overnight.
So I'm going to go back to what's called chronic absenteeism, which is 10%, missing 10% of the year. And that's something we report to the state. So out of 180 days, school year, 18 days approximately that they're missing. And we had 22% of our students that were chronically absent this past year. I think that's actually a little below the state average, if I recall correctly. 22% is actually down for us. The year before, we had 26% of our kids that were chronically absent, met that definition. And so it's a real concern in Ohio, to get that number down. I think that, when you're missing that large of a percentage, you're going to struggle to keep up in school. And so, again, the ability to homeschool easily, I think, is something that people do whenever so, sometimes they do that because they don't want to face the requirement of coming to school.
Wow. That's wild. So you just don't even know how those kids are doing, and they're just, you have no clue what could be going on with these kids.
When they're homeschooled, correct. Now, when they're still on our what I'll call on our books, they're still connected with us and not unenrolled. We are still doing what we need to do to make contact with families, have diversionary hearings for attendance, involving law enforcement or the courts, juvenile court. But once they decide to go to homeschooling, we don't have a lot of teeth at that point. We don't have. They're outside of our reach.
No more truancy complaint. No more school knocking on the door. No more reason for any one official to ever set foot inside that house again. Records show Elizabeth Ciders herself withdrew from Gallia County schools back in 2008, at 15 years old, the exact same year she got married and had her first child. That's not a coincidence I'm comfortable sitting with. That's a cycle. A pattern repeating itself one generation later, in the same county, under the same system, with nobody stopping to ask why. And cycles like that don't break themselves. They get broken by someone paying attention, or they don't get broken at all. Here's the part nobody talks about. Before that Honeysuckle Street house, before Omar Street, Children's Services had already had contact with this family back in Gallia County. That contact is part of why they moved counties in the first place. So this wasn't a family that slipped through one crack. This was a family that kept finding new cracks in new counties, under new addresses, and the system kept losing the thread every single time they moved.
Had some type of contact with the Ciders in Gallia County, and that was part of the reason that they moved. Was this contact part of the reason why Elizabeth registered the children for online schooling? Okay.
Gary Ciders Jr., Elizabeth, and Christina Ciders are sitting in the Southeast Ohio Regional Jail right now, charged with child endangering. All three have pleaded not guilty. Gary Sr. is out on bond, in a location authorities won't disclose. And attorneys for all four family members have now raised questions about their competency to even stand trial. Let that sink in for a moment. The legal process itself might stall out before a single one of these kids gets an answer about what actually happened to them. 16 children are in therapeutic foster care tonight. 16. We still don't have a real update on what they went through in that house, or in the other homes before it, in Gallia County and Vinton County, over years and years of moving. What we do have is a superintendent who sat down on camera and told the truth about a law that stripped away the only safety net some of these kids had left, and a truancy complaint filed years before anyone with a badge ever showed up at that door. You already knew the system was broken before I said a single word tonight. You felt it the second you heard 16 children and one address. So here's what I want to know from you, and I actually mean this. If a school district can see the warning signs a full year in advance, file the paperwork, sound the alarm, and still watch a family slip clean through a loophole nobody bothered to close, who exactly is that homeschool law protecting? The kids? Or the people who don't want anyone checking?